welcome to Just Kampers Project 2022. We've stripped the panel van out, we've removed all the ply lining, and now we're going to remove the bulkhead. The tools we're going to be using throughout this first part of the job. We have a trim tool, so that's going to be help us aid to remove some of our trim parts that we need. You can also use a flat bladed screwdriver if you don't have a trim pull tool. A T30 screwdriver. Now a lot of the VW stuff is Torx 30, so again that's very useful. This is a 22mm socket on a ratchet, and this is used for moving the studs out of the floor which hold the seat base down. 16mm socket, which would go on our ratchet, and a 16mm spanner, because some of the seat base nuts you can't get to with your socket, so you have to use a spanner. A number 10 spline. This is used for removing the seat belts on these VWs. And just a 10mm socket. That's for removing all the 10mm nuts on the bulkhead. Then we have a drill. Again, this is very useful for removing the ply lining screws. Again, if you don't have the drill bit end to put a screwdriver bit in, you can just use a standard screwdriver. And then we have our angle grinder with a very thin cutting disc and our soft pad flapper wheel grinding disc. So to remove the bulkhead, we've got 10mm nuts all the way around. These bulkheads are in two halves, so what we're going to do first is remove all those 10mm nuts with a ratchet. So let's crack on. Okay, so that's all the nuts removed from the top half of the bulkhead. So we're going to go into the cab now, remove the strip from the other side so we can then actually physically remove this part, and then we'll come back and we'll unbolt the bottom half. Okay, to access the last remaining fixings for the top part of the bulkhead, you have to remove this plastic trim first. So you need a trim tool. If you haven't got a trim tool, again, a flat bladed screwdriver would work. So we just gently go in and prise open, and we should start to remove this strip. Yeah, so that's one. That gains us access to these last remaining screws. Okay, so our Torx 30 fixings, there's only 4 of them across the top. Now you can unscrew those with either a screwdriver, or if you have a socket, a T30 socket and a ratchet, again you can use that also. They're not particularly tight, so we should be fine with just a screwdriver. So let's just have a look. That's all our fixings out. Now we need to go to the other side and physically remove the panel. Okay, so now we can remove the top half of the bulkhead. I have left one fixing in to stop it falling over when I was around the other side removing the last top fixings. So let's remove that last fixing now. Okay, that's all the fixings out. So we should be able to lift the bulkhead down and get it out of the vehicle. There we go. And that's that removed. Okay, with the top half now removed, we can remove the fixings and remove the bottom half of the bulkhead. So we start, again, it's all 10mm nuts. Okay, we take care of the last fixing. So keep hold of the panel, remove the last fixing so we don't drop it. And now we should be able to remove the bottom half of the bulkhead. Okay, so now we've removed our upper and lower part of the bulkhead. We're left with the lip that goes all the way around, the upstand along the bottom, which we have to remove. So our next step is to remove the seats before we can remove this, because these have to be cut out or ground out with a grinder. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is remove the double seat. The double seat is just fixed to the floor. It's quite an easy removal. So first we need to pop the seat up. So we pull the front of it up, slide it over. And that reveals our nuts that we need to remove. So you can either do that with a spanner, which you will need, and the option of a ratchet and a socket if need be. So these are 16mm nuts. You can't get to all of them with your ratchet, hence why you need a spanner. so to remove this plastic trim, we use our trim tool. Again, slot it down. Again, if you haven't got a trim tool, that's fine. You can use a flat bladed screwdriver. We're just gently prising that away from our fixing. Okay, with that out of the way, we can get to the last nut that's holding the chair down to the floor. We need to undo the electrics and leave them behind so we can move the seat out. Okay, so the first part, we're going to remove this fuse box here. Now there's two screws on top here, and again they're Torx 30. So our Torx 30 screwdriver, again, the same as we used for earlier. We're literally going to unscrew this. Obviously retain our screws, so we need to put this back. Okay, so that gets that out of the way. Again, we've got another plastic cover here. So again, we're going to use our trim tool to just basically ease that out of the way so we can remove our piece of plastic. Allow us to get to our electrical connections that we need to undo. Okay, so our electrical connections here, we have 4 plugs. They're all color coded, so again we can just unplug them without a worry of which one they went in. So again, it's just a press with the thumb, which releases the lock-in part of the plug, and then you can just easily slide it out. All of them are the same, just pushing the little release, out they come. Okay, so that gets our plugs out of the way. Now the socket part of the plug is actually screwed to that plastic, so we can undo that with our Torx 30 and get that out of the way. Unscrew the receptacle part of the plug. They're held in by 2 Torx screws, size T30, so we take our T30 screwdriver again. And that allows us to remove that part from the seat so we can freely lift the seat out without dragging any electrics out with it. So now our electrics are unplugged, our fixings are removed from the seat base. So now effectively we can just lift the seat out. So we'll close the seat back up. We should be able to move it off its mounts. Okay, so now we're going to remove the plastic part of the handbrake cover. There's a little clip that keeps it in place. So we take care with a very small screwdriver. We can undo the clip, and then we should be able to slide it forward and up. So this is the clip here to release the handbrake cover. We put our screwdriver underneath it and just lift it forward, and that allows us to slide the cover off of the handbrake. Okay, so now we just need to remove the bottom part of the handbrake cover, and that simply lifts up. There's 2 little clips, so if you can get your fingers underneath it, it just literally pops out, and we can slide that away. Next stage is to remove the driver's seat. So we've already removed our passenger seat, removed our handbrake cover. There's some electrical parts on the driver's seat here that we need to undo. They're 2 Torx screws, Torx 30, as the same as we've been using throughout. So we need to undo these and drop the fuse box cage down, or this is a plug cage down, and then the last thing we need to do is disconnect 1 plug from the seat. Next part is we're going to remove the handbrake from the seat. Now there's a small plug here. You need to gently unplug that, and out it comes. You lift this tab and that allows the plug to remove. And we'll keep that on there. Just make sure our handbrake's off. At the moment our handbrake's on and under tension, so we let the handbrake off. Again, make sure the vehicle's on the flat, or it's stuck in gear, or you've got a chock on the wheel. So the only other thing we need to do now is undo these 2 nuts here that actually hold the handbrake to the seat frame. Okay, with both nuts removed, we can then just lift the handbrake up and off, and we can leave that lead on the floor. Now we're going to unbolt the driver's seat. There's 4 fixings to the floor, and they're 16mm nuts, so we're going to use a spanner because it's quite easy access with a spanner. Once you've cracked it off with a spanner, you should be able to remove the nut with your fingers fairly easily. They won't be tight all the way up the thread. And that's all our seat fixings removed. Okay, now we've unbolted our seat, so we're going to lift our seat up, but be careful because we still have electrics connected to the seat. So it'll give us enough room to be able to lift it up and then gently lie the seat back. And then we just need to undo the plug. Okay, so the last thing we need to remove is the plug from the seat. So the wiring comes up through here. The wiring is held onto the seat here. This is just a push clip, so we literally pull that clip off and then with both fingers push in and we should be able to release the clip. And that's it. Then we can take the seat out. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to remove the seat belts and the trim around it, because obviously we need to gain access to this lip here. This is an unboltable lip, so once we have the trim out we can literally unbolt that. This we have to cut, so again we need to remove the plastic to protect the seat belt and the plastic trim. So we'll go ahead and move that. So the first thing we need to do is just pop up to reveal our fixing, which is for our seatbelt. Now this is a number 10 spline, so you will need a spline tool to undo that. Next part we need to do is remove this trim. This trim is now, it's clipped on with some push-on poppers. So we need to be able to get behind the trim and start easing it forward. Carefully place our trim tool down the back. And the poppers should come away. And one more at the top. It's a little bit fiddly, but just take your time with that. And then off that trim comes. Okay, and we need to gently pull the seat back out as far as we can and get this part out of the way. The next part is to remove the bottom half of the trim. Now, if we can keep hold of the seat belt, we'll stop it from retracting. It will just help us out. So again, this is on a popper. We should be able to get our trim tool down through the top. And then we're ready to remove this first part of trim. Again, this is held in with 10mm bolts, so we can go ahead and unbolt that. That's fairly simple. And that's that part out. It's exactly the same operation on the passenger side. So we remove our trim with our seat belt, and then we remove our lip. Okay, so we've removed both seat belts from both sides and the trim, and also we've peeled up the rubber matting as well to give us access to be able to cut this lip out. Now before we cut this lip out, we need to remove these studs, which are our seat fixings, to enable us access with our grinder to cut from the other side. So we'll do that now, and then after that we're going to mask up the whole of the front of the cab because we need to protect that from all the grinding sparks. But first let's remove these. Okay, now we need to mask up. Okay, so we've masked up our bulkhead area, and that's literally to protect the glass and the cabin from sparks from our grinder. So what we're going to do, we've got an angle grinder here with a slitting disc on it. It's a very thin disc, and we're going to cut these welds where the lip of the floor meets the lip for the original bulkheads, because we need to remove this. So we need to cut through these welds all the way along, inside and out. And obviously doing so, we need safety equipment to do that. So we need a decent pair of goggles or a full face mask, ear defenders or ear plugs. So we've got ear plugs and a set of metalworking gloves. So we'll crack on, fit our equipment. Okay, now we're all ready. I'm going to make the first cut. Okay, so when using the grinder with the slitting disc, you just need to take your time. If you're not confident in using it, just take your time and go very slow. This thin disc will cut very easily through the metal, so you need to be very gentle with what you're doing. As you see here, I've removed sections at a time rather than trying to cut the whole thing off in one. Now, there's a spot weld where I've cut either side of, and we can get to that later and grind it off with a soft pad rather than the cutting disc. At the moment, obviously, we're using the cutting disc to cut away as much of that lip as possible before we need to revert to a soft pad grinder. Okay, so we've added a little bit more protection from grinding, because as you can see, there's quite a lot of dust, and this dust is corrosive, so if it sits on top of the paintwork, you will end up with corrosion coming through. So that's why we've done a bit more protection there. Okay, so we've ground our lip off all the way round. We did take our time because it's quite a time-consuming job. It's not necessarily something you can knock out in an hour, it's probably a few hours work. We need to cut through here again with our grinder, and then with a soft pad grinder is remove that. But first, a little tip to make that easier is that use a screwdriver or a small lever bar as such. And basically, we stretch the metal up a touch, and that will allow us now to cut through with our angle grinder and remove that piece completely. And that will leave us with our welded part that we need to soft pad grind. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to cut all the way along our pieces with our angle grinder to remove those. Okay, now we've got our soft pad fitted, we're going to use that to grind away the weld that's left on the body. And be sure to clean up properly, make sure you use your hoover. The dust and the grinding particles that come off, it is corrosive and it will eat into the paint, so make sure you clean it up. Okay, so the last bit we need to do is grind off the edges that are left from our bulkhead lip. So we've done along the floor, and we just need to finish these side sections. Last part of stage one is to cover up our bare metal with a direct to metal paint without a primer's fine. So we're going to cover up all the parts that we've ground. It doesn't matter what colour, because obviously we're going to cover this in the end anyway. This is just literally to prevent corrosion and give us some protection. So that's part one complete of Project 2022. The van's been stripped of all its ply lining and boarding. We've removed the bulkhead and the bulkhead lip. Make sure to follow us to see the progress of this van for van conversion guides.